Hooters is a restaurant that's known for wings and tackiness. But they also flew in the sky, advertising their logo and restaurant for 3 years, back in 2003 to 2006. When Hooters Air began flying, their clear differentiating distinction was the Hooters girls and their in-flight service. It was something completely different and unique from other airlines back then, and even more so today. Every Hooters flight featured 2 Hooters girls. One big misconception back when Hooters was still in operation was that the flight attendants were actually the Hooters girls. Hooters did have proper flight attendants, 3 for every flight, who provided the same flight service as any other airline. The 2 Hooters girls wore the exact same outfit as in the restaurants, orange shorts and a Hooters tank top. They were on the planes mainly just for looks and fun. The Hooters girls would help out the flight attendants, who wore regular uniforms. But they weren't allowed to serve the drinks and free meals available to passengers. Since the Hooters girls didn't have FAA certification, they couldn't push the food carts or operate any equipment on the plane, such as closing the doors. So they ended up doing more entertainment-type tasks, such as hosting trivia or selling Hooters merchandise. Hooters started way back in 1983, when it was founded by 6 businessmen in Clearwater, Florida. They scraped together roughly $140,000 to start the business. Even though the guys who had the idea for Hooters had a lot of fun, they were short on vision. Enter restaurant executive Hugh Connerty. He had wandered into Hooters when he was in Clearwater scouting locations for a steakhouse chain he had started. He loved Hooters and he wanted a chain throughout the country. He proposed the following deal to the original 6 founders: $50,000 to each founder and 3% of the revenue of any restaurants he built using the Hooters name. The founders also got the right to build more locations in a 6-county area of Tampa Bay. Connerty would get the rest of the U.S. All he was required to do was stay faithful to every aspect of the original Hooters, right down to the secret wing sauce the founders had created. Beginning in 1985, Connerty started building Hooters in Florida cities other than Tampa. But he had one big problem. The founders had the fun, he had the vision, but they all needed one more thing: capital. Enter businessman Bob Brooks. He saw the potential in Hooters after he was approached by Connerty for a loan. Brooks had gotten rich from running a food service business, and he also had experience in running restaurants after buying some distressed restaurants. No other restaurants were anywhere close to what Hooters was offering. He decided to loan out the money, despite the fact that he was a devout Methodist Christian. Even though he was religious, kind, and soft-spoken in nature, he was still tough in business. By 1988, Connerty had fallen behind on his debt, and Brooks ended up taking over his stake in Hooters. Brooks taking over Connerty's stake provided Hooters with a much-needed financial stability, but his business-focused decision-making clashed with the original founders. They liked the cash flow that was generated from Hooters, but they bristled at the cost-saving measures that Brooks enforced at the Hooters he ran. For example, the original founders believed that their version of blue cheese was sacred. They stopped Brooks from using the blue cheese that his own company produced. There was Hooters of America, the entity Brooks owned. Then there was Hooters Incorporated, the entity the original founders owned. The original founders thought that Brooks and his team of executives in Atlanta lacked soul and creativity. They thought of their idea of Hooters as a work of art, whereas Brooks and his team only saw it as a business. The founders maintained that any changes Brooks wanted had to be approved by them, as agreed upon from the beginning. The conflicts back and forth over the years were proving too much for all parties involved. Something had to give. In 2001, the original co-founders sold all of their interest in Hooters to Brooks for $60 million. By 2003, Brooks was flush with cash from his continued investment in Hooters. At that time, his other investments outside of the restaurant business mostly included casinos, which were all designed near or around Hooters restaurant chains. So Brooks began looking for an airline. Originally, Brooks approached Vanguard Airlines, a distressed airline, but the owners refused to allow him to buy their assets as they didn't agree with a Hooters-themed airline. So Brooks approached the owners of another distressed airline, Pace Airlines. Their business model had suffered as a result of the dot-com bubble bursting and the demand for their flights falling substantially. Pace agreed to sell the airline to Brooks, who subsequently brought in a team of airline executives for the task of making Hooters Air a reality. Hooters' first target market was golfers, but they also took over the previous routes Pace flew. But many of the old Pace routes were abandoned in favor of new routes to domestic destinations with large golfing communities. Hooters entered the airline industry at a time when many carriers were eliminating extra services. This was done in an effort to cut expenses because of the massive decrease in demand of flying as a result of 9/11. Hooters instead went the opposite direction. They decided to maximize value for their customers. They served free meals to all customers on trips lasting over 1 hour. Their seats offered a generous 34-inch pitch in a seating arrangement that was comparable to first class by their competitors. In keeping with the golf-friendly advertising, this was called club class seating. They offered direct flights to golfing destinations at a low flat rate. Back then, many flights were a flat rate of $129 for one way. At first, Hooters Air was a rousing success. They added even more daily flights to more locations, as well as adding back many of the routes they had previously abandoned only months earlier. The first couple years were a big success. Hooters Air wasn't actually known for just their interesting novelty of flying real Hooters girls who also worked at the restaurants. Hooters also brought success to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where Hooters Air was officially headquartered. They enjoyed the increased number of tourists that Hooters was bringing in. Many small towns and airports that were rather remote also enjoyed the success of Hooters in the beginning. In fact, Hooters Air was so successful that in late 2004, they tried to expand again. Hooters partnered with Sun Trips, who wanted to operate flights between the West Coast and Hawaii. However, the partnership never got off the ground, and the airlines never utilized the routes established, even after doing all the necessary paperwork and legwork with the FAA. But all that fun in the air couldn't last. The disintegrated partnership with Sun Trips was the beginning of the end. Even though Hooters started off hot, Brooks and his investors ended up losing a stomach-churning $40 million when all was said and done. In February 2005, Hooters tried to expand again, the last time in their short history. This time, Hooters added a route to Rockford, Illinois. The local airport authority promised to subsidize the route, which was the only way to make sure the route was profitable for Hooters at the beginning. By December of 2005, Hooters was forced to leave Rockford because of too much competition. The local airport authorities left out one little important detail to Hooters execs. The same deal that was offered to them was also offered to United Airlines, who dominated the routes. But let's go back a few months. In the summer of 2005, there was a big increase in the price of jet fuel. This hit all carriers hard, but especially the smaller, independent carriers who didn't typically lock in future contracts for jet fuel, such as Hooters. This big increase in fuel prices made many of Hooters' routes unprofitable, forcing them to raise prices on those routes. However, this increase in ticket prices led to nearly empty flights because customers would simply fly on other airlines offering cheaper tickets. Then, in August of 2005, Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Rita caused severe damage to several airports that Hooters operated out of. They lost a large portion of their already dwindling revenue. Everything came to a head in January of 2006. All of the problems Hooters faced caused them to cease all commercial operations that month, before being dissolved in March of 2006. One problem Hooters had was the lawsuit they faced. 2 college students sued Brooks for stealing their idea. Supposedly, several years prior to starting Hooters Air, the students had approached Robert Brooks about having a Hooters-themed airline. However, Brooks said no, but went ahead with the idea anyways. In the eyes of the 2 college students, this was him essentially stealing their idea, so they decided to sue, an event that was highly publicized at the time. Although the students lost the case, it didn't help Hooters' image. Robert Brooks had initially wanted to have Hooters Air as a flying billboard for the chain, as well as a way to diversify its holdings. Although it was a decent attempt, $40 million down the drain later, Hooters Air went extinct, mainly for factors it couldn't control. Click to watch one of these next videos, and let us know in the comment section if you would have flown Hooters Air.